Less than a half an hour's drive brought the travellers to a large factory, which, whatever it might be within, was on the outside, though itself as grim as a coal smoke could make it, surrounded by a fine expanse of rural scenery. In answer to their application at the gates, they were civilly desired to walk in, and presently found that the routine of the exhibition was precisely similar to that of the morning. It struck them both, however, that if possible the children looked more worn and weary, more miserably lean, and more frightfully pallid than those they had seen before. Nevertheless, Mary failed not, when taking leave of their conductor, to request permission to attend the Sunday school on the morrow. "Certainly," was the reply, pronounced in a tone as clearly announcing the speaker's connection with the party self-styled evangelical, as the broadest Irish brogue does the birthright of the speaker call himself a son of the Emerald Isle. "Certainly. The Lord forbid that Christian woman should ask to be present at the doings of the godly, and be refused." On inquiring the hour at which they should be there, the man replied, "As the clock in the tower of the Lord's house strikes 7, Mr. Joseph Tomlins, by the blessings of God, will begin to speak the exhortation. The prayer will follow from the lips of Mr. Robert, and then the schooling will begin." "We must be here, then, exactly at 7?" replied Mary. 10 minutes earlier would be more decent time," replied the man, with a gravity of aspect that approached a frown. "Our gentlemen are very strict as to their hours in all things." They civilly promised to be very punctual, and departed. The factory was built on the side of a hill so steep that the back part of it, to which the shed used as a schoolroom was attached, could not be safely approached by a carriage. Miss Brotherton, therefore, and her old friend, on arriving at the bottom of the hill on the following morning, got out, and, desiring the vehicle to wait their return, proceeded on foot by the path pointed out to them as the way to Master Tomlin's school. The ladies were more than punctual, for it still wanted 7:15. They therefore seated themselves on a fallen tree by the roadside, and watched the arrival of 1 or 2 miserable-looking children, who were laggingly approaching the spot. "You look half asleep, my poor child," said Mary, laying her hand on the shoulder of a little girl who, ragged, pale, half-washed, with eyes half-closed, was being dragged onward by an older child, a boy, apparently of about 10 years old. "She be so hard asleep by times," said the boy. "I can't get here on." "But why is that, my dear? Surely 7 o'clock is not so very early," said Mary. "We are all to the mill till 5 minutes afore 12, said the boy, making another effort to pull his sister onwards. "How? Do you mean to tell me that you were working at midnight?" demanded Mary. 5 minutes afore 12 we stopped, 'cause it was Sunday," replied the boy. "Come along, Peggy," she added with another stout tug. "I shall catch it tomorrow from the lookers if I is too late for the sortation." The little girl, who had fallen fairly asleep during this short delay, being thus roused again, stumbled onwards, leaving Miss Tremblett and Mary alike undeceived as to the humanity of instituting a school to be carried on under such regulations. They determined, however, to witness with their own eyes the operation of teaching children to read who were fast asleep, and walking on, came within sight of the schoolroom door just as Mr. Joseph Tomlins showed himself on the step before it, with his watch in one hand and a Bible in the other. "Wicked and ungrateful children," he began, "is this the way you obey your earthly master, who leaves his comfortable bed and his breakfast untouched to lead you to the feet of your heavenly one? Wicked, idle, and ungrateful." But at this moment Miss Brotherton and Miss Tremblett appeared in sight, and in a voice suddenly changed from reprobation into drawling softness, he went on, "Come unto him, little children, I forbid you not, but urge you with tender Christian love, early and late and early, to hear his word and sing his praise." Here he stopped, and bowing to the ladies, offered to lead them to a place where they might be well accommodated for the exhortation and prayer, and for hearing the children also, if they wished it. As soon as they had entered the sort of pew to which Mr. Tomlins led them, the 20 or 30 miserable-looking children who were assembled in the room were called upon by a loud word of command to kneel, and down they tumbled, the elder ones in several instances taking the little creatures already asleep beside them and placing them on the floor as nearly as they could in the attitude commanded. The sonorous voice of Mr. Joseph Tomlins was then heard pronouncing an exhortation intended to show that obedience to their earthly masters was the only way of saving children from the eternal burning prepared for those who were disobedient in the world to come. Mary, as she looked earnestly round upon every child present, greatly doubted if there was one sufficiently awake to listen to this, and in her heart she blessed the heaviness which saved them from hearing the mercy of their Maker blasphemed. A prayer followed this exhortation, as little like what a prayer ought to be, as was the preparation of the little congregation who listened to it for bearing part in religious ceremony. Still Mary Brotherton waited till the end, nor left her station till the nominal business of instruction had proceeded sufficiently to convince her that poor Sophy Drake's account was strictly true when she said, "Keeping our eyes open Sundays wasn't possible, 'cause they didn't strap us." The children were not strapped, and consequently they were, with very few exceptions, literally fast asleep during the hour and a half that this ostentatious form of instruction was going on. Unwilling to attract more notice than was necessary, Miss Brotherton and her companion remained till the drowsy tribe were roused, awakened, and dismissed by the loud voice of Mr. Joseph Tomlins, and then they also slipped away, regained the carriage that waited for them, and returned too. "Now then," said Mary, as their one horse dragged them deliberately along, "now then, dear Tremlett, our search must really begin. As soon as we have breakfasted, we will set off in the same equipage, for Mchl being the first on my list where apprentices are taken, and moreover within a morning's drive of." "How shall you endeavor to gain admittance, my dear?" demanded her friend. "As we did yesterday, merely stating that we are strangers traveling who are desirous of seeing factories," replied Mary. "But don't you expect to get in, my dear, do you? You don't expect to get in, do you, my dear?" "After all, Mr. Bell told you about apprentices," exclaimed Miss Tremlett. "Probably not," was the answer, "and in that case, my dear woman, you know what is to happen." "You are really in earnest, then, Miss Mary?" rejoined her friend in an accent which betrayed some nervousness. "You are really meant to do all you said when we were shut up together?" "Most certainly I do," replied Miss Brotherton gravely. "Do you suppose I was jesting, Nurse Tremlett, in what I said to you?" "No, not jesting, Miss Mary. No, certainly not jesting. I only thought that maybe after a little more thinking about it, you might change your mind." "You do not yet understand me, nurse," said Mary, with vexation. "You do not yet comprehend how determined I am to persevere in this business I have undertaken." "Do not say so, dearest Mary," replied the old woman with emotion. "I do understand you. I do know that you will leave no stone unturned to obtain your object. And indeed, I love you 1,000 times better than ever I did. That is just because I do understand you. Only I did not feel quite sure that you would have the courage." "We shall see, Nurse Tremlett. Courage, I believe, often depends more upon the earnestness of the will than the strength of the nerve," said Mary. Their attempt to get admittance to the apprentice factory was, as they both expected, abortive. They were told that no persons were admitted there except on business, and having nothing such to plead, they retreated as they had advanced, somewhat fearful lest their having taken so much trouble for nothing might excite the alarming observation, "It is very odd," on the part of their driver or some of his gossips. The distance was considerably greater than they had expected, and they had little more time on their return than sufficed for securing places in a cross-country coach for the morrow, which would convey them to a small town named by Mr. Bell, within a morning's drive of which were 2 establishments known to receive apprentices, howsoever and wheresoever they could get them. Having again booked their places in the name of Tremlett, prepared their travelling luggage for a further progress, and taken a meal that served for dinner and tea in one, they went to rest. But it was long ere the excited mind of Mary permitted her to sleep, nor did she, in fact, close her eyes till, after repeated consideration, she had decided totally to change the plan of operations she had fixed upon for the morrow. Miss Tremlett had not yet left her bed, when her young mistress appeared at the foot of it on the following morning, with her ivory tablets in her hand. "Nurse Tremlett," she said, "do you remember which, among all the places mentioned here, was the one Mr. Bell declared he considered the most likely for Sir Matthew to have selected in his purpose was to keep the abode of Mchl unknown?" "Dear me, my dear Miss Mary, Only think of your being up already and me lying abed so, was the reply she received. Never mind that, dear nurse. It is not getting up time yet. I am only restless. Do you remember the name of the mills that Mr. Bell particularly dwelt upon? I dare say I might, Miss Mary, if I was to hear it spoken again, said the old woman, sitting up in bed, and endeavouring to feel awake. Now then, listen, dear soul, and stop me when you think I name the right. Mary then turned to her tablets and read the names with the descriptions of the localities inscribed there. It was not till she had reached the last in the list that Miss Tremlett again spoke, and then she exclaimed promptly, "That is it, Mary. I am quite sure that is the place. I will bet 10 to 1, he said, that if Sir Matthew had been for putting the boy out of sight, Deep Valley Mill is where he will have lodged him. And those were his words, Miss Mary. I could quite swear it." "I was pretty sure of it before, Nurse Tremlett, but now no doubt can possibly remain. Hear me, then, my dear kind friend, and tell me truly if I am right or wrong. I settled last night, nurse, to set off and visit all these factories exactly in the order in which they are here set down, but after I went to bed, it struck me that it would be surely better to begin with a place pointed out by our good friend as the most likely to afford success. I like the business quite as little as you do, nurse, and would gladly shorten it, if possible." "But, my dear, won't the stage we are going in take us the wrong way?" "A little roundabout, but I see no objection in that. We have no particular wish, you know, to have our course traced, and this setting off in one direction, when our purpose is to take another, must go far towards preventing it. So that you will see we have no immediate change to make, and you have only to get up and eat your breakfast in time to be ready for the coach that is to stop for us here." "God bless you, God bless your dear heart," said the old woman. "You think 10 times more of me than you do of yourself, darling. Sleep little last night, Mary, and getting up before anybody else in the morning is not the way to be quite strong and composed by and by." "Fear nothing. I feel perfectly well, and greatly pleased by our change of plans. I have great faith in this visit to Deep Valley, and long to have the experiment made and over." Mary Brotherton was quite correct in her geography. The place to which the coach conveyed them was at about the same distance from Deep Valley as from, and, without making any further inquiries concerning that mysterious spot, which indeed the memoranda received from Mr. Bell rendered quite unnecessary, she ordered a chaise, on quitting the stage-coach, to convey them to the nearest town, at which he had stated that it would be likely that they should find decent accommodations for the night. Both the young and the old lady were rather surprised, on reaching this place, to find every house in it that offered public accommodations so poor and miserable looking as to make them almost afraid to enter. Their driver, however, soon drew up to one which, upon Miss Tremlett's inquiring as if it were the best, he assured them was not only the best, but the only one that the ladies could find comfortable. "Here, then, we will get out," said Mary courageously, and giving her friend an encouraging smile, she preceded her into a room that smelt strongly of tobacco smoke, ale, and gin. "Can we have an upstairs room that might be more open and airy-like?" said Miss Tremlett, looking anxiously at her young mistress. "To sleep in?" demanded the woman who had received them. "A sitting room, good woman, I mean," responded the meek-spirited Miss Tremlett, half frightened by the woman's look and accent. "What? This is not good enough, I suppose? Then you may trudge. It is good enough for your betters," replied the woman, who looking most alarmingly sulky. Had the last been addressed to herself, Mary Brotherton would have thought it one of the duties imposed by her pilgrims to endure it, but as it was, she slipped out of the dungeon parlour with great celerity, and reached the house door before the postboy had succeeded in his attempts to untie the cord which fastened their trunks behind the chaise. Apparently hands were scarce to this unpromising hostelry, for he was performing the business alone, at which Mary greatly rejoiced, as it enabled her to address him unobserved. "This does not seem a comfortable house, my lad, that you have brought us to. Do you think we might do better if we tried another?" "It be the best in town," was the reply. "Then you cannot drive us a mile or two out of it?" said Mary, in a very coaxing voice. "We should like to sleep at any little country inn by the roadside a great deal better than this." "And how would my master's horses like it, I wonder?" said the postboy. By this time Mary's purse was visible in her hand. The youth's countenance softened as he gazed upon it, and he presently gave an unequivocal symptom of relenting. By scratching his head, Miss Brotherton held a half-sovereign between her finger and thumb. "I will give you this," she said, "beyond the sum you are to receive for the horses, if you will drive us on to some clean country inn at which we could sleep." "Where is the old lady?" demanded the boy, in something like a whisper. "I will bring her out this moment," she said, and without waiting further parley, Mary flitted back again through the vapor of tobacco and spirits to rescue her old friend, a deed of daring that found its reward in the look of gentle satisfaction with which her signal to quit the parlor was obeyed, for Miss Tremblett was one who could not bandy words, and she had therefore endured without intermission or resistance as much insolence as could be compressed into the period of her abode in this apartment. "Why did you not follow me at once, dear nurse?" said Mary, as soon as the postboy had closed the carriage door upon them.